We often think, when a new church starts, it's all about big theological debates,
Yeah.
like Martin Luther.
Right. Nailing the theses, that sort of thing. A big stand on doctrine.
Exactly. But what if it wasn't about doctrine? What if it was, more human, like the fallout from a simple church election?
That's kind of what we're looking at today, actually.
Yeah, we're diving deep into this. We've got a set of documents shared by one of you about the First Reformed Church of Bulacan.
FRCB, yeah. And these papers, they detail a pretty significant split. And right in the middle seems to be this former ministry candidate, Jeremiah Pasquale.
And this new church that pops up afterwards, calling itself the First Orthodox RPC in Bulacan.
Right. So the goal here isn't just to list who left,
No, we want to get underneath that. What really caused this split? Or the reasons people gave, were they the actual reasons?
We need to unpack the claims, look hard at the timeline in these documents, and see what they tell us about what was really driving things.
Getting to the heart of it. Because often the stated reasons, they aren't the whole story.
Absolutely. It's about piecing together the sequence, understanding the different viewpoints. These documents give us a real glimpse inside,
Yeah, how maybe personal stuff, ambitions can get tangled up with church matters.
So let's start at the beginning. Jeremiah Pasquale. He's involved with FRCP, wants to go to seminary. Seems straightforward.
You'd think so. But here's the first, curveball. His own uncle, Elder Jorge Baguin, had serious doubts.
Yes, Elder Baguin. And remember that name? He pops up again later, significantly. His worry, a lack of humility in his nephew.
From his own uncle. It's pretty telling, isn't it? Right from the start, a close family member sees a potential character issue.
It suggests that maybe character was seen as just as important as, say, theological agreement, at least by some.
And it feels like a bit of, foreshadowing. Because the pastor then, Reverend John Flores, he actually says in these papers he didn't listen to that warning.
Yeah, he admits that. Which maybe highlights, the pressure pastors are under, wanting to support members, maybe overlooking warnings sometimes.
Or perhaps just hoping for the best, wanting to encourage someone local.
Could be. It definitely shows the weight of those leadership decisions, and maybe a bit of regret later for not listening to someone who knew Pasquale so well.
And there's another layer here early on.
Yeah.
Pasquale's seminary application itself wasn't smooth sailing. He apparently struggled with academics.
That's right. Things like logic, philosophy, languages.
Yeah.
The FRCB delegates actually had to really push for the requirements to be eased a bit.
They argued they just needed more ministers badly.
Exactly. So you already see this pattern, maybe. Pushing boundaries, bending rules a little to get him through.
Which maybe could create a sense of expectation or entitlement down the line.
It's possible. It sets a certain precedent, doesn't it?
Okay, so fast forward a bit. There's this big doctrinal debate happening in their wider denomination, the PRCA, about good works, salvation.
Yeah, a significant controversy. And FRCB, the leadership there, they're following this closely, reading the publications, the records.
And it's not just academic for them. It starts discussions inside FRCB. And Pasquale and his friends, they're involved in these talks.
And this is where things get really interesting. The documents show Pasquale and his group basically saying early on, if things don't go our way on this doctrine, we might leave.
Wow, really? That early?
Yeah. And they even went to Reverend Flores, the pastor, asking for his support if they did leave. They even hinted at financial help for him.
So, we'll take care of you financially if you come with us when we split over this.
Pretty much. It suggests they were already thinking about forming their own thing and maybe trying to secure the pastor's backing.
That definitely puts a different spin on things.
It does. And eventually the whole FRCB congregation, plus their mission work, they do decide to leave the PRCP and join the RPC instead. But it was a collective decision, not just Pasquale's group forcing it.
Right. The whole church moves together. You'd think, okay, maybe things settle down now. But no.
No. Because then comes this really strange thing with Reverend Flores' salary. It suddenly doubles.
Doubles. And he wasn't happy about it. That seems odd.
Very odd. He notes his own discomfort. And Elder Reuben Catalan, another name that becomes important, gives the reason.
Okay, what was the reason?
Catalan apparently said it was to prepare for Pasquale eventually taking over as pastor in Bulacan.
Whoa. So there was already this assumption, this plan among some leaders that Pasquale was the heir apparent.
It certainly looks that way, and Reverend Flores, he even makes this joke, like, oh, so this isn't for me, it's to get ready for Jim. Jim being Pasquale.
And they all laughed.
Yeah, the documents say they laughed, but looking back, Wow. It totally foreshadows the fight over the election, doesn't it?
It really does. That laughter sounds pretty ironic now. It kind
Yeah.
of baked in this expectation about Pasquale.
Exactly. Setting the stage for major disappointment when things didn't go according to that unspoken plan.
So let's talk about that election. Time comes to pick a new pastor. The consistory, the church council, decides on an election, not just appointing someone.
And Elder Catalan, the one who explained the salary bump, he apparently wasn't thrilled with an election, probably preferred just appointing Pasquale, given that understanding.
Shows a difference in how they thought leadership should be chosen, maybe. Election versus appointment.
Could be. Election gives the congregation more say, appointment is more top-down.
And the results? Not what Catalan or Pasquale expected, clearly.
Not at all. Emmanuel Yasuhaso wins pretty decisively. 18 votes to Pasquale's 7.
Ouch. And Pasquale didn't take it well.
The documents describe him reacting very negatively, visibly upset. And then he makes that comment about being the son of Bulacan.
The son of Bulacan. What did Reverend Flores think that meant?
Flores says he didn't really get it either, but it sounds like Pasquale felt entitled to the job because he was local.
Right, like it was his birthright or something. The loss must have been a huge blow.
Seems like it, because almost immediately after that vote, criticisms start flying.
Aimed at who?
Aimed at the consistory, the leadership council, and at the newly elected Reverend Yasuhaso. And guess who's leading the charge?
Let me guess. Pasquale's friends. Catalan and Reg.
Bingo. The documents point fingers directly at them, and the timing is just crucial here. The unhappiness flares up right after the election loss.
Not before.
No, the documents stress the link. Disappointment seems to turn instantly into questioning the church leadership.
Okay, but then, what about this baptism issue? Because the documents say that became the reason they gave for leaving later on.
Yes, the baptism excuse, as the author essentially calls it. The claim is that this doctrinal issue was why they left.
But the timeline doesn't support that.
Not according to this account. The evidence suggests the division, the discontent, it was already brewing because of the election before baptism became a major talking point.
So bad feelings were there first.
Seems so. Reverend Flores mentions that right after the election results, one of Pasquale's friends in Manila was already calling around, asking how people voted.
Focusing on the election loss, not baptism.
Exactly. Which supports the argument that baptism was, well, a convenient reason found later. A more theologically respectable cover for being upset about the election.
Finding a doctrine to fit the feeling, maybe.
It looks like it. And there are other things, too, like comments made by Pasquale's side belittling the members in late, calling them less intelligent.
That doesn't sound like a purely theological disagreement. That sounds kind of nasty.
It does add an unpleasant dimension. Plus, there's this inconsistency the documents point out.
What's that?
Pasquale's friends, Catalan and Ragarag, started criticizing decisions the consistory made, decisions they themselves had approved when they were on the consistory earlier.
Seriously, so they changed their tune once Pasquale didn't win.
That's the implication. Their objections conveniently popped up after the election didn't go their way. It raises questions about how genuine those criticisms were.
Okay, this is getting messy. What about the actual leaving, the withdrawal?
June 2022. A whole group submits withdrawal letters. But the author noticed something odd. The letters were all incredibly similar, like suspiciously similar. The author uses the phrase same thumbprint, suggesting one person wrote them all.
Like a coordinated cut and paste job, not individual decisions.
That's the strong suggestion. A planned exit managed by someone.
Is there any proof beyond the similarity?
Yes. There's testimony from someone who was part of Pasquale's group but later left it. She explicitly says she didn't write her own withdrawal letter.
She didn't write it. Did she even know what was in it?
She says she didn't know the contents before it was sent for her. That's pretty damning evidence against the idea of everyone leaving based on personal conviction.
Wow. Why did she leave Pasquale's group then?
She said she wasn't getting spiritually fed, and there was just constant negativity and attacks aimed back at FRCB and Reverend Flores.
And the documents also accuse Pasquale of, what, misleading people.
Yeah, misleading the main RPC church body in America by claiming everyone who left wrote their own letters, implying it was all individual conscience.
Which this testimony directly contradicts. That's a serious accusation about honesty.
Very serious. It paints a picture of trying to manufacture legitimacy for this new group.
Which brings us right to that new group, the First Orthodox RPC in Bulacan. Is it even a legitimate church, according to these documents?
That's the core question raised, and it hinges on one person initially, Jorge Baguhin, Pasquale's uncle. the one who had early concerns.
Right. He shows up as the elder in this new group. So what's the problem?
The problem is the timing. The documents are very precise here. Bagwin submitted his irrevocable resignation as an elder from FRCB back on May 28, 2022.
Okay, May 28th. And the new church formed when?
June 12th. So he resigned 2 full weeks before this new church was even officially a thing.
And his resignation was accepted by FRCB?
Yes, on May 29th. So he was officially, unequivocally not an elder anymore in the eyes of the established church structure he came from.
But then just a couple of weeks later, on June 12th, he's acting as an elder in the new group. How does that work?
Well, according to church rules cited here, it doesn't. You can't just resign from office and then decide you're back in office somewhere else, especially not by appointing yourself.
So self-appointment is a no-go in their church rules.
Explicitly prohibited by the church order mentioned. His resignation meant his official authority, his calling as an elder, was gone, finished.
So him acting as elder in the new group was illegitimate from the start.
That's the argument. And this leads to that fruit of the poisonous tree idea.
Ah, the legal concept. Explain how that applies here.
Okay, so if Bagwin acting as elder was illegitimate, the poisonous tree, because he had no proper authority, then everything that resulted from his actions is also illegitimate.
Like what? What are the fruits?
His acts of overseeing the new group, installing Reuben Catalan as another elder alongside him, and crucially, ordaining Jeremiah Pasquale as the minister.
So if Bagwin wasn't a legitimate elder, he couldn't legitimately install Catalan or ordain Pasquale.
Exactly. The argument is that the whole leadership structure, elders, minister, is invalid because the very first step, Bagwin assuming eldership, was invalid according to church rules.
Meaning the First Orthodox RPC in Bulletin isn't actually a properly instituted church with legitimate leaders.
That's the stark conclusion drawn in these documents. It lacks valid office bearers because the foundation was flawed. It highlights how important following established rules is for church legitimacy.
Okay, there's also a quick mention of a comparison someone made. Reverend Langerak, comparing this to how the PRCA treated another group, the Second RPCA.
Yes. Reverend Flores addresses this. He believes the Second RPCA was treated unfairly by the PRCA because of the PRCA's own doctrinal problems at the time.
But he says Bagwin's situation is totally different.
Completely different. Flores stresses Bagwin chose to resign, voluntarily. No one forced him out. There was no injustice against him personally that prompted it. So you can't really compare the two situations.
Right. It undermines trying to paint Bagwin as some kind of victim like the Second RPCA might have been.
Precisely.
So after laying all this out, the timeline, the testimony, the resignation, the rules, what's the final conclusion from the author? What was the real root cause?
It comes back squarely to that election. The central argument, supported by all this evidence, is that the primary driver for the whole split was the disappointment, the bitterness that Jeremiah Pasquale didn't win the election to become pastor.
Everything else, the baptism issue, the criticisms, even the formation of the new church, stemmed from that initial disappointment.
That's the case presented. The timing, the pretext, the procedural issues with the new church's founding, it all seems to point back to the election as the trigger.
Okay, so wrapping up this deep dive, the picture painted by these documents is one where personal disappointment over an election seemed to have snowballed. It led to a split based on questionable grounds, and the formation of a new church whose very legitimacy is challenged because its initial leader apparently self-appointed after resigning.
That sums it up well. It's a narrative about how personal dynamics, ambition, and disappointment can significantly disrupt a church community, sometimes even using doctrinal arguments as cover.
Which leaves us with a thought for you, the listener. When you look at this story, with all the details about authority, motives, and the timeline, what does it tell you about how easily personal issues can get tangled up with church governance, maybe even how we interpret beliefs? How can anyone inside a community like this figure out what's really driving a conflict when different reasons are given?
It's a tough question. It certainly makes you think about accountability, leadership integrity, and just how complex navigating community life, especially in a church, can be. You need discernment.
Definitely a lot to chew on there. Thanks for digging into this with us.